Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Modern Sales Pros author series. This is our first event of 2021, so Happy New Year, everyone. And before we jump into our content here today, I wanted to thank Jeff both for joining us today and also being a valuable member of the MSP community. He's one of the Modern Sales Pros experts. And Jeff, we're really excited to have you on today. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Richard. I've been really excited to have this conversation with you for a while now. So thank you for having me.
We're excited to hear. And Jeff, now where are you in the world today? Are you out on the Cape or are you back home?
I'm in Cape Cod. So I was living in New York City for a little over 7 years. I'd moved there to as one of the early employees at Nextcaller. And pandemic hit in March. I thought I'd be going down to Cape Cod for 2 weeks, and turned into almost a year. So down here in the Cape, it's actually kind of quiet. Cape Cod's nice, or it's a big tourist destination over the summer. It's nice and quiet right now, and we'll see where things take me in the next few months here.
Hopefully we all get the jab soon, and then the Cape is a fun, bustling summer experience for you and the family.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is awesome. We're going to give folks just another minute to get settled in here before we jump into it. And Jeff, I know we're going to get to learn a little bit more about you, but one MSP tradition that we've had since the start of the coronavirus pandemic is we like to ask our speakers just one question. And that question is, what hobbies or skills have you developed other than book writing since the start of the coronavirus pandemic?
Yeah, so something that I've been doing a lot more of since the beginning of the pandemic, and it's probably a good thing that I've been doing it, is meditation. So I've been a lot more purposeful, making time in the morning to meditate. And that's something that I think is just really important, especially when you're going through times of what feels like a crisis. I started an online HIIT workout, high intensity interval training workout for my coworkers and friends, and it's adorably called Kirchick. And I started Kirchick as a joke, actually, kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, but there were a lot of people who wanted to stay fit, I suppose, and been joining. I've been running it pretty much every day since like April, and it's been pretty fun. We actually, sometimes I do like a fundraiser. We've raised a lot of cash for some social justice movements and things like that. And anyway, yeah, those are a couple of things that I've done to try to help keep myself sane.
We have a little bit of a renaissance man here. So folks, afterwards, if you need tips on book authoring, if you need tips on meditation and mindfulness, or if you want to learn how to, or you want to get involved with Jeff's HIIT practice, this is the man. Oh yeah, and by the way, I think you moonlight as a VP of sales in your spare time too, right?
I do, yeah. I have a day job. I'm the head of sales for Nextcaller. We are a Y Combinator backed tech company in New York City, like I said, and we focus on fraud and authentication for call centers. It's kind of a niche subject. It's probably not something you hear about every day, but basically we have a tool that helps primarily large financial institutions to trust the identity of their caller, to help make the customer experience better and to mitigate fraud. So I've been doing that role, like I said, for about a little over 7 years now. Been a lot of fun working with enterprise customers, and yeah, we'll see where it takes us.
This is great. Well, folks, we've got a quorum here on the attendee side. Thank you all for joining. And Jeff, thank you again for joining us. Before we jump into our kind of inside the author's mind story and learn more about Jeff and the Authentic Selling book and talk through some of the key concepts, just wanted to thank you all for joining us here today. This event is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who don't know, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. So those are folks that are in sales management, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our community members to help them answer the questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own, whether that's through bringing on great speakers like Jeff to share their story, whether it's through our online discussions, or hopefully, once we all get the jab, getting back to in-person events so you can actually meet and greet some folks in person. but across our 20,000 members, we have about 6,000 different organizations. So when you ask a question, you're not just getting perspective from one little slice, you get perspective from across the land. Everything that we do for our community members is free. And for those of you who are maybe new to modern sales or aren't members, you'll be invited to join afterwards. And we certainly hope you will. But enough about modern sales pros. It is my pleasure to introduce Jeff, the author of Authentic Selling. And Jeff, as we said before, thank you so much for joining us today. And you started to talk a little bit about your background when we were introing, but I'd love to learn just a little bit more about your background and kind of how you got to the point where you were actually tackling and running sales at Nextcaller.
Yeah, sure. So I might have somewhat of a non-traditional background. I kind of fell into sales by sheer luck. It wasn't something I was planning on doing. I grew up playing a lot of competitive sports. I remember even going shopping with my mom or running errands. I'd be sitting in the food, the grocery aisle, swinging an imaginary baseball bat, daydreaming about becoming a professional athlete. But obviously it didn't work out for me to become an athlete. But I was always very competitive growing up. I played competitive sports, got into Princeton, was very fortunate. And, most of my classmates do the typical Princeton thing, which is, getting to a job on Wall Street or consulting or, become a doctor or whatever. And I was a little bit all over the place, but I eventually stumbled upon a sales role, and I got excited about it because one thing that I really knew that I could do well. I really believed in myself because of my work ethic. I've always been a really hard worker. I've not been the best at every single thing that I've set out to do, but I've always worked incredibly hard. If I set out to do something, I work really hard at it. So I liked the idea of writing my own paycheck, if you will, in sales, and decided to end up in that. And I've been working in sales for over a decade now, a few different companies, and the rest is kind of history.
We're excited to have you on, Jeff, and it's always great to have folks with non-traditional backgrounds get into sales. And for our audience today, so here's really what we're going to cover. The chat panel is open. Feel free to comment or provide your running commentary there. But today we're going to dive in with Jeff about a couple things. First, the inspiration for the book itself. It's awesome. I plowed through it. It's really great. But we want to learn a little bit more about Jeff's desire and what his inspiration was. We're going to talk about a few of the things covered in the book, not all of it, specifically empathy, getting to the yes before the yes, and making sure, Jeff talks a little bit about this concept of the customer and how they're not always right. Last, we're going to wrap with Jeff just giving some tips and tricks for our audience members about how to actually write a book, how to craft more content. And then throughout, if you have any questions, please do use the Q&A panel, throw them in the chat panel, and Jeff and I are going to do our best to get it. So Jeff, let's jump into it a little bit. What was the inspiration for Authentic Selling? What was the genesis of it?
Sure. So there's kind of a boring answer and a more exciting answer, but I'll start with the more boring answer and we'll get more exciting, I guess, as we go. The boring answer is, when I was in college, I was an English major and I had a certificate in creative writing. So I enjoy writing. I enjoy the creative process. I've been writing a blog for a few years now. I really enjoy writing. And if it were really up to me, it was up to me, but I guess I should say, if money were not a factor, I probably would have just become a screenwriter after graduating from college. But I decided to get into sales instead because I thought maybe I can make a lot of money in sales and then I can afford myself the financial freedom to pursue some sort of writing career. And, pandemic is actually kind of a good time if you want to pursue a writing project. You get a lot more free time to do it. So, I've always had this voice in the back of my head saying look, you really need to do more with writing. Honestly, a lot of times if I got good feedback on a blog post I wrote, that always mattered more to me than getting a big commission check. It just moved me more emotionally if I could move others with my words. So I knew that I always wanted to do something with writing. Doing something that's related to my career felt like the easiest, least risky way to do it. It's something where it would allow me to kind of keep my options open about where I want to take my life. But it's also, I had spent a lot of time training a lot of people in my sales role, and thought, I got good feedback from them. A lot of these are younger people, and they would always tell me that they appreciated how I made some of these concepts accessible to them. So I thought, hey, maybe if this is the feedback I get from the people I hire, maybe other people might enjoy it as well. So that's kind of the boring explanation. I think maybe I'll let the folks at home be the judge, but maybe the more exciting explanation is just being, intimately aware of what is going on in our dialogue today in the United States. I'm not, politically, I'm kind of in the center. I don't fall on like team blue or team red on all things, but I've been very discouraged just seeing the way that people talk to each other. I would go on social media and see people calling each other names, or people making memes that willfully mischaracterize what their political opponents are saying, and actually almost trying to insinuate that other people are stupid. And that this is everywhere I look. When I turn on my social media, it's people calling each other names and calling each other stupid or being condescending. It's on TV. Everywhere I turn, you can't escape it. There's very few modicums really of conversation that are left where people treat each other respectfully. And I always kind of thought in the back of my head, like, wow, these people must have no sales acumen, because you don't sell your ideas by criticizing people. You don't sell your ideas by making people feel dumb. You don't share your ideas by shouting people down. You don't win that way. I mean, it might make you feel good, but if your goal is to be effective and actually sell an idea rather than just stroke your own ego and feel like you're right about something, then you need to have sales acumen. And so I guess, Richard, to come full circle, and sorry for being a little long-winded here, but the answer, to the question is, I saw that this was happening around me. I became very discouraged. In the absence of legitimate discourse, all you're left with is violence. So I'm actually very nervous. I mean, look what happened last week, as a real life example. And I thought, well, I don't know if I'll change the world writing this book. I don't know if I'll get invited onto Joe Rogan's podcast or something like that. But if I can get at least a handful of people to think about the way that we treat each other in this dialogue, then that would be a win. If I can make some small dent or some small difference in the way that people perceive others with a lens of empathy, then that would be a victory as well. So that's kind of a more personal reason why I wanted to write the book.
And I think that thank you for sharing that. I think the other part on this too, Jeff, that you talk about in the book is the rise of AI and machine learning and the impact that that's going to have on sales as a discipline. And so it's almost like incumbent upon us as sales leaders to make sure that our teams can do these things authentically, because some of the maybe grunt work or less sexy parts of sales will be taken over by the machine at some point.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Richard. We've seen already how automation has impacted a lot of different industries. Whether you were a fan of his or not, Andrew Yang was one of the Democratic presidential candidates. He would talk a lot about automation, and his whole idea about universal basic income was predicated on this idea that automation is a real threat to a lot of industries. The one that he used was trucking, where truckers would be replaced essentially by autonomous vehicles. So when I wrote the book, it's for everybody. It's not just salespeople. It's like you could be a trucker and read the book. The idea is that automation is going to render whole professions obsolete. The one thing that we have that separates us from machines is our authenticity. It's our literal humanity. So when it comes to sales, there are these sales training programs that we all learn. And I'm not saying that you should not listen to any of them, but what I am suggesting is that you can program a machine with these sales training programs. You can train a machine how it should respond to certain things. In fact, it's already happening. There's already technology that's been proliferated throughout the sales world that does automation for sending emails, responding to inbound leads, and so on and so forth. So one of the arguments that I make in the book, to your point, is, look, if you don't even, maybe you think being authentic is stupid and you disagree with me about authenticity and it sounds too, cute and cuddly for you, that's fine. But even if you disagree with me on that, it's still an undeniable fact that you're going to need to embrace it to protect your job. Whether that's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, if you want to, you're going to be interviewing against the robot. So you're going to want to be authentic. You're going to want to embrace your authenticity. That's the idea.
I think it's a great segue, Jeff. And I think one of the most interesting parts, or I think one of the most impactful chapters for me to read was the chapter on empathy. Right. One of the great parts for folks in the audience who maybe haven't had a chance to read the book, obviously check it out. But this book is great because it really does impart sales skills as life lessons and life skills. And there is a very thorough chapter, and it's a very humanizing chapter for Jeff on empathy. And I think there's a lot to dive into here. Jeff, maybe it's helpful to start a little bit with some background on that chapter and share a little bit more about your background, because I think there was a catharsis that felt like was happening during that chapter.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two parts to the empathy chapter. One part is actually kind of just about our political dialogue, and the second part is about an actual experience that I had in college. The first part, which has to do with politics, I kind of talk about a leadership coach that I have, that I've worked with in the past. And she gave me some advice, basically that her advice was, people do not try to suck on purpose. And I want to be clear, when I don't think that if somebody disagrees with me or makes me upset, that by default that they suck. What the advice really means is that we have a tendency when people upset us to feel that it's intentional, that they are literally waking up every day with like a poster of you on their ceiling, and they're like, oh man, like, how am I going to mess up Jeff's day? Like that's their life's mission. And the thing is, people don't have time for that. Like, very few people have time in their agenda to just want to upset other people. We always do it. It happens a lot unintentionally. But the premise in this chapter is, look, we have differing backgrounds. When I was a kid, I had exposure to certain information. I had certain values in my family. Stories were spun to me a certain way. I grew up with a certain way of looking at the world that was honestly really outside of my control. And there are people that have a completely different set of facts and circumstances for whom they can get to a conclusion that is completely different than mine. I can find their conclusion to be reprehensible. However, there is a part, like what we should have is an ability to at least understand how they got there and find it plausible that they're not evil, right? So in other words, rather than just jumping to the conclusion that this person has a horrible opinion, they must be a bad person, the train of thinking should be, this person has a what I think is a really bad opinion. They must have been working off different set of life circumstances, information, et cetera, to have gotten there. And to some extent, you need to have non-attachment to your own ideas, and that can be very difficult. What I mean by non-attachment is an understanding that you might be wrong. And when you have some non-attachment to your ideas, it means that you lack the conviction to do what I think are crazy things. People that have so much conviction in their ideas are the people who tend to excuse violence. Something that's happening right now that kind of frustrates me is I see people on one side of the political spectrum getting angry about violence when it's on the other side of the political spectrum, but not when it's on their own side. And this is happening for both sides. When they see it when it's from their team, it's okay, but when it's on the other team, it's bad.
There's a lot here. No, I think there's a lot here, and I think not to cut you off, but one thing that I do want to make sure that we talk a little bit about here is the people waking up, and no one, like, I don't have my Jeff poster up and like, that guy, I'm gonna get him today. I can't wait to throw a monkey wrench into his life. One of the things that or a concept that I learned early in my sales career was this idea of Hanlon's razor. And I think most folks know Occam's razor, right? The most simplest outcome is oftentimes, or most simplest reason is often that, the truth. Hanlon's razor is similar to Jeff, what you're saying, where it's this idea of you shouldn't attribute to maliciousness what you can attribute to negligence. Like, it's a very self-centered perspective where you wake up in the morning and you're like, that Jeff guy, he's messing up my deal. He's he's a dumbass because he doesn't understand this concept, and like, if he just got that, he would buy. I love that point, and I think it's important for sales leaders and to impart that upon their sales teams, right? No one's out to get you. If they had the time to focus on just what Jeff is up to, I think they probably don't, right?
Yeah, of course. And look, I'm not gonna. I want to be clear to everyone who's watching. Like, I'm not perfect at this. Like, I still lose my cool with people. I mean, it's part of life. We're human beings. Like, we have emotions. It's what makes us who we are. I think what I am proud of is my awareness of this, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and act like I am some beacon of what everyone ought to be. I get impatient with people just as much as the next person. But something that's missing from our dialogue is an awareness that we need to be striving in that direction. A lot of people have just gotten to the conclusion that it's not even worth reasoning with other people, that they're just evil, that they're not, that there's no point in it. And that's what I disagree with. It's okay to slip up. No one's perfect, but we should have a common set of standards, whether that's, we're not going to be violent towards one another. We shouldn't hurt people. That should be a fundamentally, that's something we should all agree on. Empathy is something that should be on that list. We should strive to be empathetic. One of the second part of that chapter, Richard, I'll touch on briefly, but basically, I had a pretty bad experience in college. I had some stuff happen to me at my senior year of high school. I had a friend who died in a car accident, and basically I went into college just really desperate to make friends, and it was really evident I was trying too hard, and it all backfired on me because I wasn't really being my authentic self. And for many years, I really resented a lot of people. I resented my college experience. And then, more recently, I realized, like, maybe in the same way that I could have been a better person back then, maybe it's true of other people too. Like, maybe the people that I resented so much were really just young kids trying to fit in too. And maybe that came at my expense. Like, I don't have to forgive. I don't have to find their behavior acceptable, but I can forgive them, right? Like, that's something that is a personal example that I use about how I maybe started out being less empathetic and kind of just blaming all my problems on other people, and then came around to accepting, like, you know what, maybe I did have some role in this. I have some accountability to my own ways, and maybe I can extend the same benefit of the doubt to others. So that's something that I think I'm very passionate about this, something that I try to work on all the time.
Well, I think it's a really interesting point. Sales, in a lot of ways, brings all of this to the front seat. That thing that you were uncomfortable with, that insecurity that you have about whatever, is going to eventually show up on the sales floor in some way, shape, or form. And I think that the part, Jeff, that you mentioned, and this is pretty telling, is that idea of forgiving yourself and forgiving others. Not to turn this into self-help, but a lot of what you're really advocating for here is just like, we were all 18-year-old kids who didn't know anything about anything, all trying to be what we thought we needed to be, and it's okay. And I think that the finishing that shot, Jeff, it's amazing how far you've come, as you talk about in the book, in terms of your relationship with your alumni association, with your former classmates, because you've forgiven yourself.
Yeah, I think that one of the other themes that kind of cuts into that too is is accountability. I mean, the thing with forgiving yourself, part of it is, before you even get that far, you need to be able to see yourself as a flawed person. And the reason I say that is because if you don't see yourself as a flawed person and you see yourself as a perfect person, it's actually very hard for you to be empathetic towards others because you don't see how other people are not as perfect as you. And actually what I found in my experience is like some of the people that rub me, I guess, maybe as being a little more egocentric or maybe a little more narcissistic are the ones who are more eager to just call people names or just lack empathy. You need to be accountable. You need to be accountable to your own failure in order to be able to exhibit empathy. Because when you see yourself as a flawed person, you start to be able to recognize the flaws in others and be able to forgive them for their flaws because you are no different. It's only when you elevate yourself above other people and assume that you don't have the same flaws or that you are not flawed that you struggle with empathy because you're unable to relate to people in that way. And so for me, with that experience, it's hard to be accountable. People don't like admitting that they screwed up at something. It's
Sucks
unpleasant. Um,
sometimes.
right. But like, honestly, people admire, I think like kind of a hot take. I mean, I think people really more so admire accountable people who fail than they admire winners. I think that we always root for the underdog. We root for the person who lost the game and then came back to win or something like that. We like
Or the
people.
backup quarterback, right? The backup quarterback's one of the most popular folks on a losing football team, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
we like the guy and or the girl who keeps trying and doesn't just point fingers at other people. I mean, the example I give in the book, and probably not a good one because people probably don't like him, is Tom Brady. He was a sixth round draft pick. He was kind of chubby. He wasn't supposed to be great, but he kept working at it and he became a winner. And people, whether you like him or you don't, like everyone agrees that he's an admirable person for his work ethic and that he wouldn't accept failure. And that took accountability. He had to be able to say, like, I need to get better. You don't get better without that. So that's something that I think intersects with these themes as well, as being able to be honest with yourself about your own shortcomings.
I think this is, and I think we could probably spend hours talking about empathy and how to have that as a leader and how to impart that upon others. Bringing it back a little bit to the folks in attendance here today, how do you suss that out in an interview process, right, Jeff? You've got a team, you've hired a bunch of folks. How do you suss it out in an interview process? And then how do you help your team build an empathy muscle so that they can better be authentic when they're selling?
Yeah, I think it's situational, right? So I think what you want to do is put a person in certain situational, certain situations, let's say, and ask them how they would respond. And that can be any number of things. It could be, hey, I'm X customer and I tell you that I think X, Y, and Z. How would you respond? Or, maybe even more personal situation, like, hey, what would you say if a coworker came up to you and said this thing? Like, what would your reaction be? How would you handle that situation? And I think those are good ways to try to sort it out. I mean, I think another way that you can try to suss that out is by asking them about times that they've had to deal with like a difficult situation or a difficult coworker or a difficult customer and how they treated that. Um, Ideally, what I would hope that someone would say is that they probably asked a lot of open-ended questions seeking to understand. It's very hard to get far enough to do that. A lot of what happens is when we get upset, we have this emotional muscle that kicks in and has a reaction, and then you react. The best thing, the hardest thing to do is to not let that muscle kick in and give yourself the time and space to ask follow-up questions. If you can get that far, you've won half the battle, because you've already resisted that urge to just react emotionally. But what I've often found by this is, like, if I ask people some open-ended questions, I might still disagree with the conclusion they came to, but I at least understand how they got there. And I don't, in my mind, I'm no longer thinking, wow, what an idiot. I'm thinking, oh, okay, I see where they did that. Now it's my job to come in there and say, hey, here's how I see it a little bit differently. You don't give yourself that opportunity if you just react. If you just react, what happens is you're allowing your assumptions to take control. Chances are there's a lot more information that would have been useful to you to have that dialogue. So that's the type of thing I would do to try to suss that out.
I think that's great, and there's a lot there to unpack. We've only got about 15 minutes left, Jeff, and we got a bunch of other stuff to talk through. So let's talk a little bit more. I love the chapter that you have on kind of getting yes before yes. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I have this idea about trying to get to yes before the yes is the way that I explain it. And basically what you're trying to do here, it's nothing revolutionary. You're trying to essentially get the customer to agree with you that they would accept a world. Let me take a step back. What you're doing in this situation is you're presenting a outcome to the customer that your product fulfills. So basically what you're saying is like, hypothetically, if you could do X, Y, and Z, like this is the situation, like I can give you X, Y, and Z. If is that world better than the one you live in? Like, would you buy that product if that's what it could do? And if they say yes, all you have to do at that point is show them that you are able to deliver on that thing. And the reason that that's an important, it sounds very simple. People listening to this probably are thinking, oh, I already do that or something. But here's why it matters. In selling, there's really an inflection point. There's two parts of the selling process. One is understanding that there is pain, okay? And the second thing is showing that you can deliver on fixing the pain and that you have the best solution to fixing the pain. Number two is so much easier than number one. Number one, getting someone to see their pain, is always the most challenging part. And so what you're doing when you ask this question to get the yes before the yes, if you say, I'm going to present to you another scenario, another world than the one you currently live in, what you're doing is getting them to see that they might have pain, because now they're aware that there is another world that exists where that's better than the one they have now. And oftentimes that's a great way for people to realize they have pain. The example I give in the book is like, you might not realize that you have a cavity until you go to the dentist and do some imaging, and then the dentist tells you you have a cavity. So sometimes your pain isn't evident to you. It needs to be pointed out to you. Whereas if you have a toothache, you know you have pain. You're going to come running to the dentist, and all the dentist has to do is say, look, Jeff, I can fix your toothache. And then you're sold, right? So that's why it's so critical. I say, and I argue in this, that you'd always rather sell to somebody who's already working with a competitor. And that might seem counterintuitive, but if somebody's already working with a competitor, number one on the two-part list of things you need to get through in selling is complete. They already know that they have pain. They've already made financial investment to solve their pain. So all you need to do for that customer is show them that you're better than the solution that they already have. That's a lot easier than showing them that they have pain to begin with. In a lot of ways, your competitor actually did all of the heavy lifting for you. So that's the idea that I get to in that section. And I kind of call it, they say that the best defense is a good offense. And so the reason I like the yes before the yes is because it allows you to get in front of objections. You're presenting this better world, and you're shifting the onus of the conversation from, do I have pain, to here's how let me prove that I can give you that world that I promised you. And that's like I said, that's just a much easier conversation to have.
I thought that was one of the takes in the book that was not, I don't want to say like, I didn't agree with, but it was, I hadn't thought of it that way, of selling to somebody that already had a competitor in place. Because you start to think through, oh, it's going to be a pain in the butt, right? We're going to have to rip and replace this thing, the deployment time and all of that. But that notion is pretty impressive. And I think part of that too, Jeff, getting to that yes before the yes, in some way, shape, or form, you're also racing to the no. Mm-hmm. Where you're as an AE or as a sales team, right? The only thing you can't steal more of is time.
Right.
And so it's incumbent, like, great discovery. I think there's a lot of great sales concepts that are bundled up in this that you're getting at.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I won't spend much time on this because I know we're running short, but no is a good thing, and that's why I say in the book, like, you want no. Yeah. If no is the answer, you want no. And so a lot of times you want to get there, like you just said, Richard, like you want to get there faster if that's what it's going to be. And yeah, like if I present to you this other world that I think is better than the one you're living in, and you tell me actually that world's not better, then that's good that we figured that out first. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We don't need to spend the rest of the time on this call. If we can't fundamentally agree that, you saving half your money and time is a good thing for you, and that we don't have a starting point to have the conversation, it's time to move on, right?
Right.
So I agree with that.
I love that point. And I think the other one, and there's a lot in this that's great, but the one of the customer is not always right. And I love the beginning, the story where you talk about United Airlines, which I think we've all like viscerally remember, like, oh, United Airlines. But I
Mhm.
think it's an interesting perspective to have, that the customer is not always right.
Yeah, and so here's why I say that. The argument that I make about authentic selling, first I should define it. What I define it as in the book is basically treating the customer like you would treat your best friend or a family member. And what that means is, the reason I use that as my example is because I think people are authentic towards people that they're very close with, and authenticity is really about presenting yourself honestly. And when it comes to your relationships, like the important relationships you have, if somebody pisses you off, let's say your spouse or your mom or dad or your child pisses you off, and they do something that they shouldn't have done, you could act deferential towards them, in which case the behavior will continue, or you can stand up for yourself and say, hey, I didn't like what you did, and here's why. No, you don't necessarily have to point fingers. You can give them an opportunity to clarify their intentions, but you at least call it out. And actually, by doing so, it makes your relationship stronger, not weaker. And both people need to be happy in the relationship, yourself included. So it shouldn't be any different in sales. We have this mindset in sales that the salesperson is at the whim of the customer, that the customer orders around the sales rep, and that the salesperson just says yes sir or yes ma'am. And that's really not it. It's a two-way street. We need to value our time. We're human beings. We have mouths to feed as well. And so the customer is not always right isn't like, you tell a customer mean things or that you're rude to them. It's actually just like, when a customer does something that they shouldn't do, or they're being disrespectful towards your time, or they're ghosting you, you have a right to stand up for yourself. You don't need to constantly be deferential towards people. And in fact, you will earn more respect from your customer by not just saying yes to them all the time. You'll build a more better, authentic relationship like you do with your close friends and family members. And the example that you alluded to is David Dow, who was dragged off that United Airlines flight a few years ago, and it caused this huge stir. He was literally dragged off the plane. By the way, I don't condone, that. Like, he shouldn't have been literally dragged off the plane. But people's reactions to that were very much anti-airline, as they usually are. But it turned out, when you peeled the onion on that story, that we don't need to get into it too much, but basically he was being like incredibly difficult. He had a lot of personal issues that, came to light later on, like some anger management issues, whatever. The point is, like, that what you saw initially was not truly representative of reality. That, like, maybe there was a more nuanced position to take here, where like the airline, maybe you could actually empathize with the airline, that they were taking so much heat, when in reality this guy was kind of just like, kind of a little bit out there. So, and that's been true of a lot of things. I mean, and actually I talk a little bit about it, but this idea of like capturing things on your phone has helped to show that the customer is not always right. And we call people Karen now if they're being unruly in a Walmart or something. We actually have a name for customers who are not acting professionally. So that's something that I talk about in there as well.
Well, and this builds on a lot of concepts that we've even talked about in different programming with MSP before. This idea of the service recovery paradox. I think that's another good example of this, Jeff, where if I'm servicing you and my solution shits the bed,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of folks that are really afraid of that. They want to be perfect all the time. And that's just not life, Jeff, like what you were saying. But the service recovery paradox actually backs up a lot of what Jeff is talking about here, whereby if my service fails, how I respond to that recovery engenders greater goodwill with Jeff than if everything just worked consistently. I think the other data point on this, we've had on Todd Capone before, who's the author of the Transparency Sale. And one of the things that Todd, and he's got the data to back this up, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's something like a perfect G2 rating is actually worse for you when someone's in market versus something that's a 4.2 to a 4.5. Yeah. Because and if you're honest about your flaws and what your service does and doesn't do, it's way easier for a buyer to figure out, like, do I want to work with Jeff? Do I want to work with Nextcaller, or whatever the solution may be?
Yeah, and again, that's accountability. And the reason that we value accountability is because only authentic people are accountable. Because think about it. You have to be honest with yourself to be able to say that you fucked up, pardon my language, but you have to be honest with yourself to be able to admit that. But it's people that are inauthentic who kind of know that they're being hypocrites or know that they're being stubborn, who will kind of have their hands over their eyes as like a fake them, presents themselves to the world, pretending that nothing was wrong. So again, I think that's one of the arguments for why authenticity matters. When you think about people being accountable and why being accountable is admirable, like you just said, like, it's better to make mistakes and be accountable than to be perfect. People admire accountability because accountability equals authenticity.
I think this is great. I feel like we could keep this conversation going forever, but we only got a few minutes left. So a few things about authorship. I think that a lot of folks on the line and in the community are like, oh, how the hell do you get started on this when you're starting to craft a book like this?
Sure. First, I want to just recognize my own bias, which is like I come from a writing background. So for me, it was a lot simpler than it might be for people who have a little more challenge writing or putting things on paper. But I would say that the number one thing to do, whether you're a writer or not, when you have a good idea, write it down. You might not use it right away. You might use it in a month. You might use it in a year. But I keep all my ideas written down, whether it's an idea for a future startup, an idea for a blog post. I compile all my ideas. And like for writing this book, that came in handy because I'd had all these ideas of things that I wanted to put down. And after writing them down for so long, I had enough that I could write a book out of it. So always when you have a good idea, write it down, put it somewhere. You never know when you might need it for something. Your good ideas, even if they don't seem amazing to you, they might be very helpful to other people. As far as like writing a book, honestly, it's like going to the gym. Half the battle is just showing up. So like just take some time, like carve out an hour a week, just write about some of the stuff that you feel about, and like, see, you can start small. I started with a blog. My blog isn't anything crazy. People have probably never heard of it before, but that's what helped me gain the confidence to write a book. And I'd say that those are a few things, is like just being deliberate about it. You don't need to have content necessarily to go out and start shopping a book. I worked with a group that helped me kind of turnkey from start to finish. So even if you have no experience with publishers or whatever, there are companies out there that can help you with the design work, helping you create an Amazon KDP account, all that stuff. So I would encourage people, like, you might not feel that you're a writer, an author, you might not even feel like you're much good at anything, but one thing is for sure, you have a unique story to tell. And I think everybody is incredibly interesting. I don't think anybody's really quote unquote normal. And so I hope people will have the confidence to want to share their story. And especially just, I had no experience doing this before and I was able to do it. So I think anybody can.
I think that's awesome. And I think there's actually a question coming in, and this is going to be my question to you as well. What are you doing when you say, hey, kind of write it down? Are you a physical notebook person? Do you have a digital tool that you're putting everything in, like OneNote, or how are you actually keeping track of all those great ideas?
Yeah, I have like notes on my iPhone, and I also email stuff to myself too. That's actually how I make sure I don't drop any balls in life. Like if I need to remind myself to do something, I email it to myself right away, because I just have this terrible anxiety about my inbox. So like if something's in my inbox, I need to get it out of my inbox. Whatever it is, I mean, so everybody's different, obviously, right? Like some people have a million emails in their inbox. They're very different from me. They can deal with the chaos. But whatever gives you anxiety, I guess, put it there, because that's where, you want to be reminded of it. So for me, it's either I email myself or I'll keep a note on my iPhone.
That's great, Jeff. Jeff, we're at time here. Thank you so much for sharing the story of kind of your background, how you started to think of the idea, and some of the concepts from authentic selling. Where's the best place for folks to go to snag the book? Is it Amazon? Is that where we should send folks?
It's on Amazon, yeah. So, if you want to buy the book and make the almighty Bezos even richer during the pandemic, go on Amazon.com. The book is Authentic Selling: How to Use the Principles of Sales in Everyday Life. I, want to just say to anybody who does check it out, I sincerely appreciate it. I love feedback. If you can leave an Amazon review, share on social, get the word out, definitely would mean a lot to me.
Jeff, this was really awesome. The book is phenomenal. I think it's got a lot of lessons and good commentary. Check it out. Jeff, on behalf of the Modern Sales Pros community, everybody in attendance live and those watching in the future, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your background and a bit more about the book.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. Thanks to those who watched as well.
Stay safe out there on the Cape and have a wonderful rest of your Friday. And everybody online, stay safe and we'll see you all soon. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Richard.